How many of you are here from enterprises? Okay, how many of you are here from network operators? Okay, a couple of people. How many of you are here from, let's say, government? Okay, one. Any categories I missed? Small businesses? Software vendors? Who's software vendors? Okay. Yeah. We'll leave that one there. Okay. All right. Well, so how many of you have deployed DNS Sec? I saw the hands before, but okay. How many of you are thinking about DNS Sec? How many of you are running away from it and don't want anything to do with it? All right. Come on. Okay. Well, we've got a panel today that's it's a pretty good one here. We've got, and I'll allow people to go and introduce themselves. We've got Jim Galvin, who's here from Afilias. Rick Lamb will be here from ICANN. We know he's here. He was just here a moment ago. And we have Cricket Lou from Infoblox, and also the author of several books on DNS. And Roland, I'm not going to, Roland from SURFnet. Okay. I'll let them go down. I'll let them go down and talk briefly about what their connection is to DNS Sec in a moment. But that's our panel today is going to be a series of questions. I've brought some up. Okay, Rick, come on up. There he is. Yeah, 2:45, man.
This way.
Oh, okay. Rick gets the token award for wearing a tie to Usenet. We've been giving him flack about this the whole time.
We'll get rid of that.
Oh yeah, okay, good. Yeah, now you're in the Usenet.
On camera, let's undress. Get more credibility somehow.
That's right. I don't know. It's the ICANN thing, right? You know, you've got to. All right.
My job. Don't blame me.
So we're going to do this is going to be a highly interactive session. The fact that I'm going to be asking these guys some questions, we're going to be getting some responses from them. We also would love to hear your questions, so please feel free to go to the mic. We are live streaming this, so we would appreciate you going to the mic and posting a question there rather than just calling out so the people who are remotely can hear it. And we do have a number of people. I think I saw about 20, 25 people at last I looked who were viewing this remotely. It is also being archived, and it will be up on YouTube on our Deploy 360 channel later as well. So with that, let me begin by just having each panelist say a brief bit about who they are and their connection to DNS and DNS Sec. I guess I should start with myself. I'd said before, I'm Dan York with the Internet Society. I work for Richard Jimerson on the Deploy 360 program. Is part of what we do. My primary responsibilities are focusing on developing content, tutorials, how-tos related to DNS Sec. I have a long background in DNS and pieces like that. And I'm also helping coordinate an effort that these gentlemen are all connected to in some way, most of them, about coordinating some DNS Sec promotion and advocacy that's going on within the larger industry right now. Jim, I'll let you say a bit about who you are.
So, my name is Jim Galvin. I have a long history with DNS Sec, going back to 1992, not 1993, Pete, when DNS Sec started. I was chair of the DNS Security Working Group for the 8 years that it existed, and it actually officially started in '93. He is right about that, but obviously the hallway discussions and stuff all started before that. And it was in '99, at the end of that year, that it transitioned to being part of DNS extensions. During that lifetime, it was my team that actually developed the first public domain implementation of DNS Sec. It was enhancements to bind that we had done and made available, which later, found their way into being part of bind, and were rewritten then again by the bind folks, and lots changed over the years. It's been more than 20 years since all of that started. Since then, today, I'll just jump all the way to the future here. I work for a global registry service provider. We're one of the top registry service providers in the world. We host more domains, have transitioned more domains than any other service provider. We're actually the back-end service provider for 18 TLDs right now. Our DNS infrastructure is obviously, one of the largest in support of those TLDs because we provide the DNS for them. We actually signed the first and largest generic TLD before the root was signed at Afilias. So I always like to point that out, and then ICANN played catch-up. So which is not really all that fair because they were planning the root signing for a couple of years too. So got to give them credit for being very careful about it so that they could sign it and it meant nothing to the world. It just sort of happened, which was very nice. You know, it was very good that they were able to do all of that. And we have since signed all of our TLDs. And of course, for this new TLD program, if for anybody who pays attention to such things, you know, there's over 1,900 applications, about 1,400 distinct applications, string applications, and we're looking forward to being the back-end service provider for over 300 of them. So we're especially vested in that program and DNS in particular, and looking forward to a lot more DNS Sec. Thanks.
Well, my name's Rick Lamb. I'm the program manager for DNS Sec. So I'm in charge for ICANN's DNS Sec effort, awareness, as well as the architect and the both technical and some of the policy and political stuff for getting the root sign at ICANN. We built on all the work that people like Jim had done for decades. I mean, you know, I started work there at ICANN after a couple startups and a few other random things that they said, well, you know, we have this DNSSEC thing that needs to be taken care of. You know, you want to work on it. And so sometimes it actually helps to be a little naive and just be able to just make it all happen. But it was with the support of people like Jim and others in the community, particularly in the international community, that allowed the root of the DNS to actually have DNSSEC deployed on it. In fact, the system we have in place at ICANN involves 21 people, 18 of which are from other parts of the world, anywhere from Burkina Faso to Trinidad to Russia, China. We have all the people involved in that process, and that was one of the only ways that, of course, you know, you're going out to the world and saying, trust me, you know, we'll hold the key, right? You know, it's very hard to make something like that happen, but it's because of the internet community and people's hard work, like Jim and others, that have made that happen. And so that's my job now. You know, if there's some interest in getting DNSSEC training or anything in any of your places, we work alongside ISOC and NSRC, a few other organizations, to offer free training. Because we hear that one of the problems with DNSSEC deployment is it's too hard, it's too complicated. Well, we're here to try to ease that along with Den. So that's it for me.
I'm Cricket Lou. I'm the guy who wrote DNS and Bind, and so I had the misfortune of documenting DNSSEC and how to manage it in the 4th edition, and then the good fortune to have to rewrite it again in the 5th edition because it all changed after the typecode rule. I work for Infoblox, and one of the things that I've done over my tenure at Infoblox is designing the DNSSEC support in the current product. So if you love or hate the DNSSEC support in your Infoblox appliances, I'm to blame or to credit. And I still work with it on a day-to-day basis.
Okay. My name is Roland from Rijswijk. I work for SURFnet. We are the research network in the Netherlands, which means we hook up academia and research institutions to the internet. We've been involved with DNSSEC for a couple of years now, and we've been trying to pioneer it for our constituency. I write a lot of documentation about DNSSEC and try to publish that in Creative Commons form. Some of it is up on the Deploy 360 website. I'm also involved in OpenDNSSEC, which is a DNSSEC signer product that is open source and available for free. And I'm on the OpenDNSSEC architecture board, so I sort of try to steer the engineers into what they're going to build next in the product.
Great. Okay, so we've got a good panel, as you can see, and we've got some questions that I'll be asking them, but I'd also encourage you to think if you've got questions as we go through this. Please feel free to come up to the mic, and if you're remote listening to us, I think you can do it either through live stream chat or you can do it through Twitter. If you tweet it out to hashtag #IonConf, we'll be able to pick those questions up and ask them here as well. So let me begin with a basic one. And Jim, you said it yourself. This was started, you know, some of the stuff started back in 92, 93. You know, it's 2012 now. Why aren't we there? What's taking so long? Anybody want to jump in on that one? Or going to make Jim?
You were looking at Jim.
I know, I'm looking at Jim.
Yeah, he's looking at me. I don't get any of the blame for this.
Oh, okay.
I don't care what anybody says. No, I mean, I think there are a lot of opinions about really what the delay has always been. I think that in the early days we learned a lot. I mean, there were 3 generations of the DNSSEC specifications over the 8 years of the DNS security working group. So there was a lot to be learned operationally about how things worked. The requirements changed a little bit along the way, and specifically I'm talking about the inclusion of NSEC 3, from NSEC. The desire to prevent people from being able to step through a zone was a change in some of the early requirements. And in reality, I think we have learned in all cases a lot about key management, and I still think that key management is a bit tricky. It's still an issue even today. I mean, we have some tools that help, but the fact is, if you're not pretty well steeped in what's going on, it's pretty easy to miss things and to make mistakes, and there's a lot of that going on in the world too. So unfortunately, I think for as simple as the DNS protocol is, that simplicity, brought with it certain complications in trying to make security work, and we're still learning and getting better at it. So let me stop there. I mean, there's probably a lot more I could say, but others probably have something to contribute.
Sure. Anybody? So is it a technology problem or a communication problem?
I'll keep it short. I think some of it's there's definitely a technical problem. Implementation kind of problem, but I think it's more of a communication problem. Security is just a hard thing to sell. So at some base level, I mean, it's just DNSSEC is a great solution to many things, but without some sort of, I think, greater awareness among the registrants. I hate that terminology, but people that actually might deploy this stuff on their corporate domain names. Without greater awareness there, I think we don't have a killer app. We don't have anything to really drive this thing. That's what I've been seeing in my world, is that there's a lot of interest in the technical community. We're all doing our best to try to make a great product. We have people that have products out there, turnkey product, which is great. But I still think there's got to be greater awareness. So it's a communication problem, in my idea.
The thing, I think I agree with something that Jim said. You can't. I remember writing the 4th edition of DNS and Bind, and I remember after being 25 pages into the DNSSEC material thinking, no one in their right mind is going to do this. There's just no way. And actually that was borne out by years of giving training on DNS, where I'd go through the DNS section and people's reaction was basically, oh, hell no, right? I am never going to do this. And it really, I think, required that we automate administration of DNSSEC to the extent possible, and we made that leap. I think Open DNSSEC has done that to a large extent, and a lot of our competitors actually have done that too. And nowadays, I think it's nearly transparent. It can be nearly transparent. There's very little about DNSSEC that you can't automate. But if you don't, you run into things that Scott Rose can tell you about. Scott works for NIST. He was measuring compliance with the OMB mandate to sign federal government subzones of Gov. And of course, compliance jumped as the deadline approached. And then, 4 weeks later, basically, as people went on vacation, and all of those RR-SIG records that were generated with 30-day, with 30-day expiration, timed out, everything began to fail because no one had set up any sort of automated re-signing. So you absolutely have to spend the time to automate this, whether you're going to do it individually within your organization, or whether you're going to buy a product that does it, or use an external service that does it for you. You can't do it yourself. Nobody's going to sit there and set egg timers on their desk to note when some
re-sign our keys.
ZSK needs to be rolled over, right?
Yeah. So it's not baking that into the operational practices. It's not happening there. That's where some of the early failures were in that space.
Yeah.
Roland, did you want to chime in? You look like you were about to.
Yeah. Well, I agree with the other guys about the technical issues. There's also a matter of investment, because very early on I participated in a survey by the European Union Security Office in ESA. And one of the questions that they had was, what's it going to cost people to implement DNSSEC? And that's actually a very difficult question, because it really depends on your technical setup. And what we've seen, you referred to the explosion of DNSSEC signed domains in the .nl zone, which is now has the largest number of DNSSEC signed zones on the planet. And they achieved that by giving a very small price reduction to registrars for DNSSEC signed domains, and it's only a couple of cents per domain. But if you have really big hosters that sign hundreds of thousands of domains, it makes a big difference on their monthly bill. So there needs to be some sort of incentive for people to deploy it, other than the security talk, which we know it's necessary because of this because of security, but that's not going to sway everybody out there to deploy this. And I think a very small incentive to sort of get people going benefits everybody. And a nice side effect of that is that in the Netherlands now, it's more likely that the Chinese restaurant on the corner of my street has a DNSSEC signed domain than the major banks do, because they have their domain hosted at a hoster that does everything for them, including DNSSEC.
Are people familiar with what happened in .nl over the summer? Okay, no? All right. Well, so what happened was, as Roland mentioned, the SIDN, the operator of the .nl registry, offered an incentive to the registrars out there to, as Roland said, it was a small amount, but a number of the registrars took advantage of that, and so they jumped from having only a couple, I don't know, it was tens of thousands or maybe 100,000 or something like that. They jumped from that to having over 1.3 million now.
Yeah, I think they're at about 1.5 million.
1.5 million domains signed. Now, to put that in context, there's only about 5 million .nl domains total. So you're already up over 20% of all the domains that are signed, and so they definitely have taken the lead in the country. And Bert Hubert from PowerDNS operates this graph. And we have it up on, if you go to Deploy 360 to our site under DNSSEC statistics, there's a pointer there to get to it. But you can see this nice little graph, and you can watch this big jump that .nl took. And you know, there's other domains in there too. .se did a similar thing where they had the financial incentive again to people, a slightly different model than what .nl did, but the same kind of idea to go and do that. Yeah. And his latest version also shows .com, which is sitting along down here. You know,
and well, the interesting thing is that it's a very small incentive. It's not costing SIDN heaps of money. Because as I said, it's a couple of cents per domain, so it's not a huge incentive.
It's amazing actually how much concentration of power there is among those hosters. You know, the registrars typically who host other people's zones for them. We do a survey every year at Infoblox where we look at the state of the namespace. And we get copies of ComNet and org, and we look to see, for example, what percentage of a large random sample of subzones have name servers that support IPv6 or signed, things like that. And in 1 year, we went from, I don't know, 2% of our sample that supported IPv6 to 25%. And the only substantial reason for that was because GoDaddy started supporting IPv6. Yeah. That was it. Yeah. That was 90%. 90% of the jump, just like that.
Yeah, GoDaddy has a beautiful implementation of DNSSEC. You click one button. I mean, you pay a little bit more, but boom, it's all signed, all automated like that.
Yeah, that was the one thing the distinction I wanted to make. I mean, sure, the big jump in IPv6, but no cost to the customer. You know, I mean, yeah, they do provide DNSSEC, but it is a value-added service. Although in the case of GoDaddy, they offer DNSSEC as part of a value-added security service, a value-added overall package. So you don't actually buy DNSSEC; they just incorporated it into a security bundle, which I think is actually quite interesting. I mean, security is a tough sell anyway. So if you can bundle it together and make it valuable overall into a domain watching kind of system, you know, all of that stuff, there's some value in that. And that's what made the difference. And of course, they are the largest registrar, you know, by an order of magnitude or more. So anything that they do is dramatic.
Yeah, it's an interesting point too on the signing. We were just in Sao Paulo last week in Brazil, and the folks down there also, the Brazilian nic.br, they have a registrar component too. And again, they've automated it so basically anybody who gets a .br domain through their registrar, all of that's automatically signed. To your point, Cricket, it just takes away all of that pain. It's simple. It's all just done that way. So,
yeah, so I wanted to just add a little bit to this, whether or not it's a communication problem or not, and sort of dig into that detail a little bit. To some extent, it's a communication problem, but I think DNSSEC is a little bit different in some ways than some other kinds of technologies because it's a multiplayer technology. So the question is, if it's a communication problem, who are you looking to communicate to? Okay, the registrants are obviously a player because you need for them to either select to sign it or not, unless, of course, the registrar is going to do it for them. So there's another player. You've got the registries, who are a player, although in the new TGLD program, the TLDs have to support DNSSEC at the top. So that'll be an advancement in that respect going forward, make it a little easier for registrars for all the rest of the new GTLDs. And you also have DNS hosting providers. And although I would assert that, you know, if the colloquial 80-20 rule applies, and it does to a large extent, you know, 80% of your domain market is going to be in registrars, and so it's a bundled service. So people buy a domain name, and they're going to get their DNS hosting and probably the majority of their web hosting right there at the registrar. DNS providers are a big part of the market for an additional 20%. All of the big providers, you know, either do their own DNS or they're going to significant providers. There's another set of people who have to communicate. And oh, by the way, there's no defined standard for DNS providers to talk to registrars, to talk to registries, to get those DS records up. So you now have huge players in the market that want to sign, that can't get their key information into the system and make it available.
Right. There is from registrar to registry.
Yes.
Right. But there's not from registrant to registrar.
Right. So if you use a third-party DNS hosting provider, you now have an extra step that you have to deal with, which is not there.
As it happens, I had a slide that kind of illustrates some of what Jim is talking about here, that talks about we have the registry, registrar, DNS hosting provider, and the registrant. And as we've mentioned, the registrar and the hosting provider can very often be the same, you know, as a bundle type of thing. But to your point, yeah, there's no communication here between the hosting provider and the registrar necessarily, you know, to be able to go and communicate that. There are a few technical holes in here. So, I mean, how do we help fix this? What do we do as an industry? What do we do?
I'm just spitballing here. I mean, this is just, you know, this is just what I see. I mean, so one of the reasons, first, I want to say I was focusing on the registrant is a lot of these other communities, they do need to be focused on as well. I'm not saying there's only one solution here. It's just that I think we haven't focused much on the registrant. Mm-hmm. That's a harder nut to crack. You know, the other groups are part of they come to the ICANN meetings, we talk to them, you know, so we kind of, they know what we want, they know about DNSSEC, but there's a large segment of the population that has no idea, and, you know.
Well, let's go on that for a second.
Well, but
let's jump to a different.
I didn't want to, you know.
Well, no, let's jump to a different question, which is, why should somebody care? On a certain level, what should the end user care about DNSSEC? Should the registrant, should the person out there, should the people in this room, should they necessarily have to care about DNSSEC? What's in it for them?
Everybody should care, absolutely. I mean,
Well,
every
but why?
non-trivial transaction that occurs over the internet occurs mediated by DNS. Mm-hmm. And so if you can't trust DNS, you can't trust basically anything that you do over the internet.
So I'll take a contrary view.
Please.
Just to keep things interesting. I have the view that DNS and DNSSEC in particular should be completely invisible. And 99% of the population should never know, care, see it. It should just not even be visible, and not even notice anything about it. And my view about that is, although I agree with you that everything depends on the DNS for all practical purposes. I mean, you can get away with not having it, but to the average user, it's always going to be there. It really should be something they can just do. The average user doesn't care. The average user doesn't even care whether or not a website is TLS protected. You know, gee, I've got a little icon that's a lock, or maybe it's green, or it's blue, or it's yellow, or whatever. And oh, by the way, I got this pop-up. Just click here to continue. Yeah, okay, that's what I'm going to do.
How many people here just click through those?
You know, I mean,
we're at Usenik, so I would expect less people to say. But how many people honestly just click through the TLS or SSL warnings? Okay, a few people have actually said yes, but all right. We're in a special crowd here.
Right. I mean, the point that I want to make is we've built up a culture of people who really don't care about security, even if you try to engage them in the security. So to me, success of DNSSEC and success in general of most security things should be measured by whether or not anybody has to care. And the average user, I would argue, in the case of DNSSEC, should not have to care. Right. And if they have to care, then we're not doing it right.
Well, I guess I would say maybe they don't have to be conscious of the fact that DNSSEC is at work doing its thing, but I think it's vitally important that we get it deployed even. 20 years later. I hope you agree, given the amount of your life that you devoted to DNSSEC, because if not...
I guess I'm going to get out of this one.
Yeah,
Jim
no,
Galvin,
absolutely.
Jim Galvin says nobody should care about DNSSEC.
You're right. So to be more precise, operationally, they should not have to care.
Right.
But I absolutely agree that DNSSEC is essential to the future of the internet, to a secure, stable, reliable environment and experience for all users.
All right. Well, I'm not entirely convinced.
Now
We're
we've
going
got a
to
line
come
here,
back
so-
to that, but we do have a couple questions out here. So let me go out here. And please state your name too for the stream.
David Klon with Airstream Communications in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. We are a wholesale ISP that provides services to small rural telephone companies in Wisconsin. And I agree, I as a user don't want to care about DNSSEC, but I as a provider, a DNS provider, need to care, and I want to care. I want to make sure that our DNS information is trustworthy. This reminds me kind of the session last year when we were talking about IPv6, and the problem then, and still may be to some extent, is the customer premises equipment supporting IPv6. And the solution or the thing that was talked about at that time last year was, let's put pressure on the customer premises equipment manufacturers. And I think that is starting to work. I think what would help is people like us putting pressure on the registrars, because our primary registrar doesn't support DS record submission, or they make it really hard. So I think we need to put pressure on the registrars as their customers.
Yeah.
That's my comment.
Yeah, you got to vote with your feet, and you got to tell them why you're leaving.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I absolutely agree. Question for you, actually, let me ask you that. On your network, do you yet operate DNSSEC validating resolvers, DNS resolvers?
No.
Okay.
Why not?
Yeah, well, we're
That's
lots
what you
of
had
things.
to
Yeah,
spot.
we're very busy, and that just hasn't bubbled up. But it's this conference is going to cause that to happen. So definitely.
Excellent.
I can guarantee you it will take you no less than 15 minutes
Yeah.
of your time, and you're done.
Yeah.
No, so, well, thank you, Dave, because I wanted to bring, you're perfect. I mean, you help with the perfect segue because, and we've been talking about the signing side, but David's a great example of the other side, which is to make DNSSEC work, we need validation to happen.
Yeah.
So thank you, but let me throw that out to these guys. So what do we need to do to help folks like David get DNSSEC validating resolvers happen out there?
So I would call attention to, and I think you have this on the Deploy 360 site, we should look at Comcast's experience in having deployed validating resolvers, because while I agree with you, Roland, 15 minutes you can deploy it and it's out there. Comcast...
You're going to disagree with me, aren't you?
Yeah.
I'll disagree with you.
Comcast is very happy to explain to you at some level of detail how operationally it's not just 15 minutes.
It really depends on the size of your network.
Yeah. I mean, obviously they're a huge provider, so they're the #1 provider in the U.S., and so they ran into a lot of interesting issues operationally of stuff that they had to deal with. And you should go look at their documentation. I mean, they've been very open and very free and public with sharing their experience and what they did, and their preparations for their help desk. And the one technical thing that I'll call out, which turned out to be interesting, that they were also very forthcoming about in the ITF, to try and create a standard for dealing with this issue, is what happens when there are, as was mentioned down here about .gov having its issues when it was rolled out, and everybody who rolls it out for the first time who doesn't really plan carefully has issues. They need to be able to deal with the fact that even though something is DNSSEC signed, their resolver has to ignore that because it's broken. Because they have a user community to serve, and if they don't serve the user community, their help desk gets calls. And the help desk, as anybody who runs one understands, is one of the most expensive parts of any operation. And so they ended up having to build in a mechanism to defeat everything that you're actually trying to deploy. I mean, it was a temporary thing. They were very upfront about it. They would, they also did their part to reach out to get people to fix things when there were problems. But yeah, I think you have Comcast stuff on your website, right?
Yeah, up on our Deploy 360 site, if you just go up there and search on Comcast, Chris Griffith from the DNS group there at Comcast gave a presentation at ICANN 45 up in Toronto back in October.
Yep.
And the slides are up there, and they do walk through some of the specific lessons learned that they went through and the pieces that were there. And if you want to hear Chris's presentation, you can also, there's a link from our post up there to the ICANN site where there's the video recording. And you have to scan through it to find his part, but you can get there and see that. Roland, before we leave this, I know you folks at SURFnet have been doing a good bit with promoting, validating. Can you talk a little bit about what you folks have been doing?
Yeah,
and then I'll get out to you, Jim.
We have, yeah, and I agree with Jim that the guys from Comcast did a really, really good job. What's interesting is that their help desk experience, they didn't get that many calls until the NASA incident occurred, when they were swamped with calls because that was linked to certain legislation getting pushed through Congress and the Senate.
Yeah, the
It was right in the
timing.
middle of SOPA.
Yeah.
That really didn't have very much to do with DNSSEC at all. It had to do with people thinking that this law was getting implemented.
Well,
and
but think about what happened. The issue was, right, if they were on Comcast, Comcast had rolled out their validating resolvers. NASA.gov's key happened to expire on the same day that everybody was fighting about SOPA. Okay, so, but that's all gone. But people were on their home lines. They went to NASA.gov. They couldn't get there. Then probably most of them whipped out their mobile phones, which were not doing DNSSEC validation. They said, oh, gee, I can get to NASA from my mobile phone. I can't get it from here. Must be a conspiracy. Let's get on Twitter and rant about Comcast blocking NASA. Okay.
As a European, may I point out that this may be a bit of an American thing, distrust of government.
You'll learn.
But seriously though, we've been running validating resolvers for a little over 4 years now, and our experience has been, I had the first help desk call 2 weeks ago about somebody who couldn't get to a certain domain, and he said, if I pick up my mobile phone, just as you said, if I pick up my mobile phone, I can go to the domain and can see the site, but if I use your resolver, I don't see anything. And we have a quite a critical group of users there, because we have mostly students on there that use those resolvers, a couple of 100,000 students. And interestingly, they seem to accept that the internet doesn't work every once in a while. Which is and the same is true for, there's another large provider in Sweden, TeliaSonera, who run, where I think the major ISP in Scandinavian area who run validating resolvers, and their experience is pretty similar to ours. They didn't get very many help desk calls, so it's interesting that Comcast has a completely different experience, and that was, I think, mainly to do with the NASA incident, and other than that, they didn't get that many calls regarding DNSSEC validation. And as you said, we've been sort of advocating DNSSEC validation because I've been saying for the last 2 years, I think, whenever I speak about DNSSEC, that there's really no excuse not to do validation. Although I do agree with Jim, if you're running a larger network, it's not as trivial as I make it sound, because you're going to have to deal with issues of deploying it on a large-scale network, and you're going to have to deal with what if a site doesn't validate and it's really important to my users, what do I do? Because we just do manual management of that. We just turn off validation for selected domains. If we know they're trustworthy and they really mucked up, like NASA, we just temporarily turn off validation for a site like that. But you can debate whether that's a good practice or not.
Well, and that's actually something that the folks at Comcast have been doing in the ITF, is something called negative trust anchors. And if you search on that term, you'll find some documents about that. I want to go to the mic. I will put in a plug that's Roland's and the team there at SURFnet put together a white paper around validation in your enterprise or in your network, in your ISP, whatever. And it's a good document that goes through and talks about the reasons to do it, the value to it, and then it has some lines at the end that show how easy it is in Bind, Unbound, and Microsoft Windows Server 2012, if I have the three correctly.
Yep. And
it shows the steps to that. So for anybody who's thinking about that, it's a good white paper to get. You can get it from either SURFnet, or we again have it in Deploy 360. You can search on SURFnet and find it. But Jan.
Hello, Jan George, Internet Society. Actually, I have a question for Roland. Can you go one slide back with the one with this one? I would like to understand how exactly you deployed that financial incentive in your country.
That wasn't me. It was my colleagues at SIDN, the .nl registry.
I know that this is a weird communication. The European guy talking to a European guy in the west coast of America, but anyway. So registry said if the domain is signed, they would charge registrar few cents less.
Yes, that's
right?
correct.
Yep.
Okay. And now, who is in charge of signing the zones here?
The majority of the people signing, the majority of the signing happened at mostly hosting providers. So they were providing website as a service kind of thing, where they just sign all the domains that they run on behalf of their users.
So these two are combined in that case.
Yeah.
It's a registrar who is also a DNS hosting
Yeah.
provider.
And the domain name registrant pays the same amount of money. He doesn't know.
Right.
No, that's right.
So it,
Signed,
so
not
it
signed.
increases the profit
So
margin of the registry.
it is
or
the
registrar.
incentive for registrar or hosting provider to.
Yes.
Okay, what if I, as domain name registrant, I run servers at home and I want to run DNS from my servers, then I would pay less or not? If I sign the zone myself.
That's it. On behalf of my colleagues at SIDN, I can say you would not pay less. Your registrar would pay less.
Okay.
But your registrar would need to. The point is that they want an incentive for registrars to support DNSSEC, and the registrars will need to make an investment in order to support DNSSEC, regardless of whether they do the signing or not, because their infrastructure would need to change. And they want to help them justify that investment by giving them a very small incentive to actually do it.
Well, I think this is really a good incentive, and I will talk back to our registry, that's NRN back in Slovenia, to deploy the same thing. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
And we can get you, there's some slides and stuff we have up on the site too around how the folks did it with SIDN, et cetera. Hello.
Hi, Matthew Barr, Snap Interactive. We actually run websites and a Facebook app and a mobile app, so we're a completely different side from all of this. In some ways, we're registrants, but we also focus on, we have 1 or 2 domains, not hundreds. We also do, but a lot of users are coming in and seeing things. So how do you, and we're in the American market, obviously, and worldwide, how do you guys think that we can go ahead and persuade, say, GoDaddy or some other large provider? Can we get VeriSign to drop their fees the same way as SIDN and encourage them to go ahead and include it for free into the standard GoDaddy control panel? That's one thing. Second thing is, even if you were to use GoDaddy or whatever other provider you use, what about Akamai and say and AWS and Amazon for Route 53? And I think there's Ultra DNS. Those are the 3 I can think of that I've used as a sysadmin for outsourced DNS providers.
Okay, so I think that there's
2 sides. Yeah.
Yeah. So certainly on the GoDaddy side, they've made a decision that they're bundling that as part of their premium DNS.
Right.
There are other registrars who have that just as part of when you go,
as their general.
It's part of there. It's if I go to Dyn DNS, their Dynect managed services. It's just one. In the control panel, there's a DNS Sec tab, and you go and you click the button, and boom, it's done. So that's a decision that each registrar is making based on a certain level of that. But
we could encourage them by making them more money on all of the people if they
Right.
would make pennies.
Yeah, as far as that larger question, I don't know. Anybody want to?
I think in the case in the case of VeriSign, as a former VeriSign employee, I think they had to be persuaded not to charge extra to allow uploading DS records.
Yeah.
Once upon a time, I remember some discussion of whether or not VeriSign was going to be allowed to levy extra charges on people who insisted on DNS Sec signing their zones. But to their credit, that never happened.
So I think that okay, go ahead.
So there's an important distinction to make here between CCTLDs, okay, which is what Roland is talking
Right.
about, and GTLDs. GTLDs are actually governed by contracts with ICANN, and pricing is actually something which is an element of those contracts. And so changes to prices are something which they would need to negotiate, and the actual process by which one does that depends on whether you're trying to put them up or put them down, and whether it's part of a new service or not part of a new service, those kinds of things.
Right.
So it's actually not a trivial thing for a GTLD to simply change its wholesale price
No, of
that it
course.
charges to registrars.
But if ICANN's interested in it, then they could go ahead and start pushing a little bit for the GTLDs.
So I can want to say anything?
Well,
Rick's like,
I mean,
Rick is like, oh, stay away from the mic on that one.
I mean, I will offer for you that that's not really, and I don't know that that would be an ICANN decision per se. ICANN is very much, I'll speak on his half, you know, because I'm an active participant in this process too, so what the heck.
Yeah, very much so.
Rick is thanking Jim
Yeah,
for...
ICANN is very much a bottom-up, you know, stakeholder kind of process, and so there's a, you know, generic name services council that probably would have something to say about this, which means all the registries, the current GTLD registries, would have something to say about how this would work, and there'd be some kind of policy that would have to be developed. I mean, you know, these are all sticking points that so a lot of things are easy for CCTLD because, you know, they're sovereign, they can do what they want whenever they choose. Not the same for GTLDs, and it's important to keep that in mind, no matter what their interests may be in making something happen.
So on the second question, Rick, you want to...
Just to finish that off, I mean, I'm hoping that it's a differentiator. I mean, that's what I heard from people like Comcast, that security now has become a differentiator. So you don't say DNSSEC, you know, that's going to confuse people. And just security. It's part of a greater security package. This is the differentiator. People will want to offer this because this distinguishes them from others. So that's the hope. And I'm not dodging the question about how ICANN. I mean, there's a process, and Jim knows that process probably better than even I do. I mean, so there are ways to do this, and it's actually intriguing. I'm listening to this. I'm listening to Roland and thinking, you know, maybe this is something I can take back and suggest, but. You know, it's a long process.
For us, it's actually fairly easy. We have a very small number of domains. They produce a lot of income. Therefore, it's a lot of benefit to me. And just like we're not a bank, but just like with a bank, there's only a certain number of domains they have. They can sign those fairly easily for a lot of return on value. So it's actually better for us if in the end. In terms of from a sysadmin point of view, though, Akamai.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. He's talking about the content distribution network, CDNs, the DNS hosting providers, all those different folks. How do we fit them in that picture here when you're using them for your DNS hosting or your content hosting? Anybody want to?
I mean, GoDaddy went down. Their DNS went down for like a day earlier this year. Yeah. That was pretty bad if you were using them.
Yeah, it was. I mean, there are solutions coming out for a lot of the content providers. I mean, I think Infoblox is one of them. F5's another. They figured out ways to deal with the load balancing. I don't know if that's what you're.
Well, load balancing too. You know, is part of that.
Yeah,
it's all a big thing. CDNs, load balancing. They're all sort of this distributed solution.
Technology's catching up to that, so that you should be able to get a.
Well, is anyone going after, say, Akamai and talking with them, or Amazon with AWS, with Route 53, etc., to go ahead? And obviously, Infoblox is an appliance. It's localized. It's a enterprise typically. So what about the larger vendors who would, you know, is there a way to go ahead and deal with the records uploads to the registrar? Do you have to do it manually, etc., the DS records and stuff? I know you guys brought it up.
So we need to separate your question into two questions, okay? So yeah, as I said earlier.
Questions, sorry.
Yeah, well, I'm going to turn it into two questions. So there is an issue between DNS hosting providers. I mean, if you make the distinction between the hosting providers and the registrar and draw that line, the observation that I have with respect to that is those who are on the 20% side of going to third-party service providers for their DNS hosting are probably also a level above in technical savvy. And so, you know, they can deal with this issue of having to get their key information up into their DNS. And they come up with solutions. If they want to, they can do that and they can make it happen because they have the ability, you know, they have the resources is the word I'm looking for, to make all of that happen. But the other side of the equation that you have with content providers, and as far as I know, you know, I firmly believe that the folks at Akamai and Amazon and these other content providers, you know, I mean, arguably they've done something good and interesting, which is they innovated on the DNS to leverage it to facilitate load balancing on their behalf for their content distribution. Okay, I mean, in one dimension, you can't really fault them for that because they did that, and look where they are and what they've accomplished with it. The problem is they've made DNSSEC very hard, if not darn near impossible. And so they now have a different problem that they have to solve. I think, I mean, I firmly believe those folks are interested in DNSSEC, but clearly they have to do things fundamentally different than they're doing it today, and this is not a trivial thing for them.
But that's a solvable problem,
yeah.
Right? I mean, it just means that you're handing back one of a passel of different responses, and you either have to sign them on the fly or you have to pre-sign them, one way or the other. Right. And it works fine. You know, as Rick said, F5 GTM does that on the fly, and you know there are other solutions that they can do it. So clearly, people with big brains at Amazon and and Akamai can do the same sort of things in their implementations, and if it were worth it to them, they would.
I see you. Are you responding to this?
Yeah, actually, in a previous job, I had dealt with some customers who were buying through Akamai, and they are doing exactly that. Basically, you give them your secret key, and they sign on the fly. Mm-hmm. So it does work, but you have to give the level of trust that they not only are doing your DNS, but they are actually validating your DNS. So as long as you're comfortable with that, they are doing it, and the other load balancers are doing the same thing.
And one thing to keep in mind also is that if what you've delegated to Akamai is, www.infoblox.com, and you haven't given them all of infoblox.com, you can carve it off into its own subzone and have it signed entirely differently and maintain a DS record in infoblox.com, and then they can have a completely different key pair or key pairs independently of yours. There's no need for synchronization or upload or anything like that.
And in another answer to the question back there, too, is we've certainly talked to the folks at Akamai, and I think any number of us here, and they do offer DNSSEC to customers who request to work with them on that and stuff. And so we're certainly talking to the CDNs and the others who are out there providing those types of services. But that is, the load balancers, the folks who are doing that certainly are an area that does need some further work, but I think it is a solvable type of issue. Yes, sir.
I'm Tex Woodworth. I'm an IT contractor, which means what company I'm with changes every couple of months. I see a lot of what's driving this. We seem to be deliberately provoking a certain amount of paranoia. And this ties in with the story about the government agency that created keys that only lasted 30 days, and everybody was on vacation when the keys expired. I spent a year with a government agency, and our passwords had to be changed every 2 weeks, and you couldn't rotate through several because it remembered every password that you'd used for the past 5 years. And as a result, if you needed somebody's password, you just turn their keyboard upside down and look for the little yellow sticky note. And so, government agencies are conditioned, oh, we've got to be very secure. And they take it to such ridiculous points. Instead of using better security, they use more often security, and that then leads to things like the little sticky notes. And the other point was, the question was, how many people ignore those TLS warnings and the expired security certificates? I see more expired certificates than I see valid certificates. And I've had root on various Unix systems since the 1980s. So why would a dude my age ignore things like this? It's because most of those warnings are crap. We need to do something about all of these expired certificates out there. It doesn't do you any good if they're all broken. Thank you.
Thank you. Good comments on both of those.
It does point out something interesting about DNS Sec in particular, and I won't blame you directly for this, Jim, but the error signaling is very poor. The error that you get back when a signed zone fails validation is simply serve fail, and serve fail is kind of a catch-all that could mean that your recursive name server was not able to find any authoritative name servers for the zone in question, or it could mean that the query's all timed out, or any number of other things. So it's not distinguished from any other errors.
Yeah, it's. Oh, Jim wants to defend himself.
No, I don't want to defend. It's just to dig down a level of detail. I mean, he's exactly right. I mean, if you're talking about inline error reporting. Okay, the DNS is a very simple protocol, all things considered, especially compared to many. And so there really were not a lot of options to do that. I mean, especially in the early days, it was all about backwards compatibility. Whatever you added to the DNS, certainly couldn't change what was there. I think there probably are a little bit more options today. You could hide some things inside in different ways. Since we've adopted, EDNS 0, for example, that allows us another mechanism for additional information. I mean, in the early days, the only real way to get at what was going on with DNSSEC was whatever you were doing locally. So you'd have your own API that would actually be doing all the validation, so your own local resolver. Of course, there's no standard for what that API looked like, so that didn't help the application developer, so that really, was not much of an advantage. And in today's world, your resolvers really are at your ISP. I mean, although there's a minimal resolver on most home machines, The average person, you're really dependent on your ISP and whatever your network operator is providing for the resolver. So again, you're back in this place where there's not a lot of error information. So to turn this into something positive in response to the comment that was put up there, my view in general about security and security applications is I think we have a user behavior problem which engineers are typically very bad at solving. And I count myself in that category too. There are people for whom this is their field of research. It's a discipline all by itself, understanding these kinds of things. But I really think we need to simplify how we deal with security. I mean, you need this sort of, yes, no, and maybe kind of model, and that's sort of it. And maybe actually probably doesn't need to exist in most cases. It's either yes or no.
Right.
And we need to get to a place where if the answer is no, you just lose. I mean.
Well, and I think we're seeing that with a lot of the DNSSEC implementations right now at the ISP level. Is the validation is just serve fail, and you don't get to the site. Ergo, these problems that people are having going to sites. We're coming down to the end of the session, so I want to go to a different space, which is one of the complaints we've heard about, or DNSSEC. The question has been, why do I need it? Because I've already got SSL, I've got EVSSL, I've got all this, I've got these protections around this. Why do I need DNSSEC?
What about email?
Yeah.
Well, but
let's just voice over IP.
Yeah. Okay, but all right, good responses. But from the website point of view, people say, well, okay, sure, so it can help me a bit here, but I paid for this expensive EVSSL thing that makes my browser bar turn green and blue and dance and everything else. So why do I care about this DNSSEC thing?
Jim really already covered that. I mean, I think that users are, for the most part, conditioned to ignore most of those visual cues, which were subtle to begin with, right? Which were, is that little tiny padlock intact or is it broken? Is the key broken? Is it intact? My mom doesn't look at that stuff, right? If you were to poison the cache of the recursive name server that most users use, redirect them to a visually identical copy of their bank's website, and just take away the fact that there was no TLS cert, I would say 99% of the people who went to that website would never realize that they were now visiting it over, anything other than HTTPS, right?
That was a DEF CON demo. That was a DEF CON demo. I think something called SSL strip, where they just did that. They walk into a coffee shop, turn this thing on, that basically intercepted all the traffic, and redisplayed it through a proxy where no HTTPS. And you'd be surprised. Cricket's absolutely right. Everyone just went right straight to their Amazon account or their eBay account.
Let me.
And this goes back to Jim's comment as well, that security should not be something that the end user worries about. It should be user friendly. And one of the things that DNSSEC at least does for you is make it, even though serve fail is very limited, it does turn it into a yes or no question, because it either yes, it's valid and you can go there and you're safe, or no, it doesn't work and you don't see anything and people call Comcast because Nasdaq isn't working.
Yeah.
So
there's one important distinction to make. The comment that I made earlier about TLS and DNSSEC is DNSSEC is complementary to TLS. They solve different problems.
Thank you.
Okay, and that's the thing that most people don't realize, and that detail seems to get lost in all of these discussions. Now, TLS, as it is implemented and deployed, is only confirming for the user that they're talking to the right server. Most users, or they're talking to the right server application. Okay, but that assumes that the user is paying attention to that and cares at all about that fact, which they don't. All right, it gives you that communication channel. It's really just giving you an encrypted communication channel. It really says nothing else about the endpoints, very little. Now, it's true the TLS protocol can do, two-way authentication, but that's not the way it's deployed today and not the way it's used. What DNSSEC gives you is that you know the IP address of the server you're supposed to be going to. Okay, and in principle, if you had secure routing, which could be built up from RPKI, which we heard about earlier, then you'd actually know that you not only had the right IP address and you know you're going to the right server, that you actually got to the right server, and then the server represented itself correctly, you would actually have a more secure, end-to-end kind of situation. But it's important that we recognize those things are complementary. They're, they don't compete with each other.
And something that's building on that, which we don't really have time to dive into today, but I'll recommend. How many people have heard of the Deij protocol? Oh, good. A number of folks in here. So basically, Deij is the idea that you take your TLS certificate or a fingerprint of that, and you put it into DNS. You sign it with DNSSEC, and now you're marrying the strong integrity that you get through DNSSEC with the actual certificate. the encryption through TLS, because when you go and DNSSEC tells you you're connected to the right spot, and then when you retrieve your TLS certificate, you compare it to what's now the TLSA record in DNS. You compare those two. Do they match? Well, now you know you are, in fact, using the correct certificate that the owner of the domain put into DNS, or the registrant, domain name holder, whatever we want. So the Dane protocol is something, and we have a page up on Deploy 360 with all sorts of resources and pointers to it, but it's something very powerful that if we get this built into browsers and also, to Roland's point, into VoIP, into email, into other pieces, it provides a mechanism for carrying, it basically turns DNS into a global PKI.
Shouldn't we let Paul ask a question since he started this all?
Well, we should, actually, and I was about to let him. Go ahead, Paul.
I'm just kind of curious here. In a world where if
and you are?
And yeah, who are you?
Who are you?
What? I'm Paul Markapetris. At any rate, I work for a company called Nominum. At any rate, in a world where going to a website can hack my machine, and in a world where, for example, one of those websites once upon a time was the New York Times, right? Because they just had somebody from an ad network inserting an attack right there over next to the sports section. DNSSEC doesn't really solve the web surfing problem. Doesn't make web surfing safe, right? Correct. Okay.
Yes.
Fine. Now, just a second. So, you know, I think that if you want to figure out how to get this moving along, you ought to concentrate on some of the things that it is good for, which might be things like, you know, protecting IANN adder, or, you know, routing information, or something, or the Dane kind of stuff. But as long as we're telling people that it's making their web surfing safer, right, we're lying to them. I mean, marginally safer, yeah, sure. But, you know, the drive-by downloads are the big threat, right?
And phishing. Yeah, and phishing. So in the large, my feeling about DNSSEC is DNSSEC is not about what it does all by itself, you know, for the DNS or anything like that. DNSSEC is about what it does for internet security, the internet infrastructure. It's a foundation on which you now can begin to build interesting security services and features to do the kinds of things that you're talking about. Because I agree with you that DNSSEC all by itself protects you very few things. It actually provides very little all by itself. For itself, you have to use it to do other things, like Dane in particular is a very big thing.
Right. In terms of making web surfing safe, it is necessary but not sufficient.
Right.
Yeah, and I think the Dane protocol is certainly one of the closest things we have for, you know, toward what Rick said, as far as a killer app, as far as something that actually provides a reason why people could say there's business value in that. Is if I can go and secure the TLS, you know, using DNSSEC, it provides it. But I agree with you. You know, your point is well taken.
So I think that, you know, if you really want to get this going, you have to figure out how to protect things where it really will make a big difference. Because maybe it makes your web surfing 0.5% safer. Or do you think that overstates it?
Not going there.
All right. Well, we are drawing to the end. Do you have a quick one?
Relatively quick.
Uh-oh. Okay, because we're eating into time for the next panel, so go ahead.
Okay, so you mentioned RPKI being possible to create secure routing, but there's kind of a problem with that, and that is that routing happens hop by hop and AS by AS, and RPKI validation kind of happens at one end or the other. And so, you know, right now RPKI is in such a state that I can go, okay, I'm at this far end, and yes, indeed, the AS number at the other end of the AS path from me looks like the one that's supposed to originate this route, so it must be good. But if AS666 prepends the AS that's supposed to be originating it, that still looks good too. And even if we do the, you know, step by step and we get to where we can validate the path through RPKI, as is currently in draft form somewhere, I think, you still have the problem that, okay, AS1 and AS2 and AS3 are validating paths, and AS4 and AS5 aren't, and AS6 and 7 are, and AS8's originating the route. And so as long as the guy finds the right AS to inject the bad stuff into, it still all falls apart at layers, many layers removed from where you have any control or visibility.
All right. Well, that was not a quick
It's okay.
and
One
I'm out of
sentence
time.
response.
So,
One sentence response.
Oh, come on, Jim.
One sentence response.
Okay.
You're right, and it's just a start. That's what I intended to say.
So with that, I would like to say thank you to our panelists. I would encourage you all to go to our Deploy 360 site, look at the DNSSEC resources that are there. Also, while you're out there and as you're looking at implementing it, if you've got questions that you can't find through our site, additional resources you'd like to see, please, there's a feedback form there. Let us know what you're looking for. Our goal, we're employed to help try to make this easier for you all. So please join me in giving a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you.